You're on in 2 and 1.
Hey, hello, folks. Yes, I'm early. Okay, this is History Reset at the Maureen Craig page instead of being at the Emily Elizabeth Windsor Craig page, which has been deleted and toto with its 3 pages and half a dozen groups. So I guess Facebook doesn't need that ad revenue anymore. Okay. And good morning, good afternoon, or evening, my friends, depending where you are. I'm Maureen Emily Windsor Craig, and this is where I'm at on Saturday. It's 1 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, and this is August the 29th already, 2020. History Reset is brought to you each Saturday to bring valuable information to the public that corporate media refuse to divulge. And this program is a public service, but please donate to People's Internet Radio to keep the people's truth coming at you without commercial adverts. Today's topic in History Reset is who's the enemy now and how do we get out of the way of what is defiling and demoting us. Okay, I have put up a link to a video on YouTube, Crystal and Cigar, unemployment over 1 million, protesters build a guillotine in front of Bezos' house. Okay, and that video is about the situation in which, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are 1 million unemployed people who used to be employed by Jeff Bezos at Amazon. But they're unemployed, but he is raking in billions in extra revenue. Likewise, Bill Gates, all right, is raking in billions now that the rest of us are behind the 8 ball. He's raking in billions on revenues created by the sale of presumed vaccine developments for the COVID-19 problem. So the robber barons make money on the misery that the political dimension creates. Now, this is a problem that liberality and the left talk about all the time. And we have to agree that it's unjust and unfair for people who are already rich to profiteer on the misery that governance causes. Let's just agree to that, okay? It's terrible that the rich hoarder class profiteers. Now, we can also speak to, in the United States, the House of Representatives, in which the representatives who have been there the longest, decades, are the richest. In particularly, I was looking into Nancy Pelosi's situation with her wealth. Okay, her wealth has been estimated at somewhere between 160 and 190 million dollars on a salary of somewhere between 175,000 and 225,000 a year. She has used her position to become wealthy at the cost of her constituency in San Francisco. And she is a liberal, and she is crying and wailing about the unfairness of the system, and yet she and her nephew, Gavin Newsom, have reaped great advantages out of the system that they deplore. Today, I want to start with how our nation has got to the point where we've got to. Oh, and my cough is better because I ran out of the cough medicine, and so the cough is going away. A nation is built, and not only the United States, but also the United Kingdom and other monarchies and republics. They have an executive, whether that's a monarch or a president or a dictator. They have a legislature and they have a judiciary. And the judiciary has to juggle, I guess the cough hasn't gone away. The judiciary has to juggle the common laws of the people, which are laws, versus the commercial rule-baiting statutes of commerce. I guess I need that medicine. And trade treaties. Now, the difference between common law and trade treaties has to do with the definitions. In the definitions of law, the rights of the people are enumerated. In trade treaties, there are no rights. Nobody has any rights except the people with the money, right? And that's the way the situation has been set up. Now, the left is correct to deplore the unfair advantage that the rich people get to maintain and grow their riches. Okay. And the left has used that argument to say and allege that the solution to unfairness and injustice is to just rip everything out, defund the police, defund the courts, take down the government, and replace it with something that provides the same outcome, the same reward for every citizen, regardless of their effort. That's liberalism for you. And it was the Frankfurt School and the Fabians and the Marxists and the Bolsheviks, okay, and Saul Alinsky all advocate that method of making things work better. And historically, what we know is that the socialistic model in which every citizen gets exactly the same outcome has never worked. It has never worked. It has always been a real problem. And the reason it has never worked is because of a philosophy of luciferianism, which says, which holds, do what thou wilt. Everybody is allowed to do whatever they wish, okay? And the postponement of satiety is not necessary. And this is why we have protests, because people are unwilling or unable to postpone satiety any longer. Great. These philosophies of social change have been dominating in quackademia since the 1880s and 1890s and the Milner Kindergarten in around the turn of the century, turn of the Boer War. And they are built on a belief system in which do what thou wilt is absolute, and there is no accountability for behavior, either at the social level. Well, at the social level, you have rules, okay. But at the level of law, you cannot do harm. But at the level of commerce, you can do whatever you can get away with. And that's why we have neuro-linguistic programming controlling people's minds who sit in front of the TV. That's why we have treachery, protection, racketeering, divide and conquer, and sedition, because any thought, any idea is equally valid in the leftist mind. There are no actual values for which anyone is held accountable. So let's look at some of the domains of knowledge and see how the domains of knowledge have contributed to this problem. Let's look at academia, okay? In academia, okay, let's look at astronomy, for starters. In astronomy, there's no life anywhere but here. There's no life on the moon or Mars or other worlds. There's no civilized hierarchy. There's no system of governance. There's no galactic system of law. Okay, that's just astronomy. Let's look at geology. In geology, regardless of what is said in old, ancient records, the Earth is a spinning ball with an iron core, despite information to the contrary. You learn geology and the Earth is a spinning ball. Even though if it were a spinning ball, all the water would spin off Antarctica. Okay, let's look at accountability in medicine. In the United States each year, if you look at the statistics, 250,000 people each year die from iatrogenic medical mistakes. 44,000 die from suicide. 250,000 die from medical mistakes. Medicine has become a form of drug running that we used to call sorcery. And it doesn't help very much in terms of health. Let's look at law. In the original Constitution, there was a 13th Amendment that forbade elites from holding office in the legislature. And now the outcome is that the legislature is only and always populated by lawyers and peers, so that elitism runs the legislature. And so that they can wrap, I have the same problem as Robert Kennedy Jr. They can wrap commercial laws around common laws and wrap rule baiting around law. And the people have to pay to have it sorted out. Okay, look at the church and accountability. Since 1965, when Lyndon Baines Johnson pushed through the 501c3 IRS statute, churches have been silenced with respect to human values and human rights. And because of 501c3, the churches have to protect their fiduciary interests above moral values. And so particularly, the Protestant church has not only become silent about morals, it has also become silent about matriarchy. Okay, matriarchy doesn't exist in the Calvinist Protestant church, whereas in the Catholic Church, at least Mary, the mother of Jesus, who made him mind when he was a kid, at least gets a nod of assent that it's the job of the mother to make kids mind. Protestantism has no such nod to matriarchy, all right, except in the Anabaptist tradition. In the Anabaptist Protestant tradition, it's run by patriarchy, but the women have set up the civil culture. Instead of going, the shop until you drop, the retail therapy route. If you're Amish or Mennonite or Quaker You make your own clothing. You sew it yourself. You buy the fabric and you make it. You determine the level of modesty that you want to exhibit and exercise. You will not see Mennonites or Amish or Hutterites or 12 tribes or nuns dressed like prostitutes. And that's for a reason, because the value of modesty has been ingrained in some cultures, and it's made to be important. The Protestant church teaches that you have to obey Caesar regardless, and that Caesar is always placed over your head by God, and whatever Caesar does is okay. Jesus had a different way of dealing with it. He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but render unto God what is God's. The church doesn't live that out very well. All right. And so what we see is that the Pope, having been given a $2 billion subsidy by China, and the neocons who want to push the imperialistic kingdom of Israel on the rest of the world, and academia, are all backing Chinese programs of massive universal surveillance and massive universal vaccines made mandatory. All right. So what we are seeing is our government has been taken over by people for whom there is no accountability for the policies, procedures, and practices that they weaponize against conservatism. If you noticed in the Mueller investigation and in subsequent appeals by the judiciary to unearth information regarding sedition and treason of ensconced elites and hierarchy middlemen in the senior executive service and in Serco and in the middle management sectors of civil service that are non-elective, the agencies have been weaponized to stonewall and foot drag and make prosecuting insubordination, malfeasance, and outright sedition impossible. What President Trump declared and promised to do was to drain the swamp. And as we all have noticed for the last 3.5 years, the FBI and the Department of Justice have made it absolutely impossible for him to do so. Those two agencies are so stuck and stagnant in their protection racketeering for their leftist favorites that they will not allow justice to be confronted. In the case of the Wiener laptop, in the case of charity fraud of the Clinton Foundation, in the case of the gun running of Adam Schiff and Feingold and Nancy Pelosi, that George Webb has carefully documented, okay? The Department of Justice is weaponized against prosecuting treason, and the FBI also. So we, the people, are in a position where we have to maneuver around sedition. That's not a simple task. Now, we know that we're not the only life that there is. We know, and I have shown you in the pictures that I've put up on the Emily Elizabeth page and Space Images Revisited and Planetary Image Gallery, that the moon is a city and that Mars has undergone some terrific difficulties in the last 10 years, having been frozen and then flooded and then warred upon. All right. We know that there are people out there. We know that there is a galactic treaty, the LNU Treaty, which was effected after Lyra fell, that says that it's okay for superior races to cull and dominate inferior races. We know that treaty expired December 21st, 2012, when the galaxy turned over from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. Okay, so that treaty is no longer in force at the galactic level, but because government has the belief that there's, or at least they propagate the doctrine that there's no life but here, that there's no galactic treaty, that there's no Greada Treaty that Eisenhower signed, or no Tau 9 Treaty that Bush signed, by pretending that there's no ETs and pretending that there's no God. The hierarchy, the mid-level hierarchy that is not elected, but rather civil service that stays there from decade to decade, with their shadow government and their contractors, their defense contractor contacts, they have been able to thwart any attempt to bring their renegade ethics to court or even to light in the mainstream media. The mainstream media are paid by the same rich people, the same Soros and the same Rockefeller and the same Rothschild. They pay the non-governmental organizations to have advocates that do their mischief for them. Okay. The Bolshevik revolution in 1917 that took out Tsar Nicholas II and his innocent family, they were paid by the Rothschilds, just as Mr. Soros today pays 100 and some odd agencies, 170 agencies, to promulgate and propagate his political vision of a one world order, top-down fascist, because fascism runs off corporate rule-baiting statutes. Fascism doesn't have laws that contain rights for the individual. And so the European Union is, because it's based on commercial statutes, it is a fascist organization. The New World Order, United Nations, it is a corporation without, it talks about rights, but its own charter is based on corporate statutes that do not include rights. All right. And so the politicians talk out of both sides of their mouth. They talk about the rights that are in common law, and then they operate by the protection rackets and the treachery and the divide and conquer that are made available as methods to them under commercial statutes. All right. And that's why we now have a government saturated with legalistically law-abiding behavior, but it's not according to law. It's according to the corporate statutes that are completely arbitrary. You have seen homeowners in Los Angeles who were prosecuted for turning their front yard into a food garden. You've seen pastors prosecuted for feeding the homeless. Okay, the commercial statutes and administrative codes are totally arbitrary, just simply according to the whims of the people who run the corporations. Now, when we owned a condominium, the condominium document with all the rules associated with the condominium was 250 pages thick, and it covered the color of the front door and what kind of shingles you could put on the roof and what kind of plants you could grow in the front yard and how you had to configure, everything was set up. That's what commercial statutes do. They set up rules and processes. And what has happened in our civil society is that the middle bureaucrats have made the processes so convoluted and so complicated and so expensive that only the rich people they favor are able to conduct a matter or a case or an issue through their entire process. This is what has happened in the Trump administration to the problem of draining the swamp. The Department of Justice and the FBI, their paperwork process has become so convoluted and complicated that nothing got through. And so the president was unable, unless he wanted to step back and started acting like a dictator, which is against his principles, to make progress against the deep state and the shadow of government and the mischief and warmongering and mercenary relationships of the secret space force and the defense contractors, Halliburton and DynCorp, and the names of these defense contractors who go in after the Army. And the U.S. Army has an ethic that is based on law, but defense contractors don't. And so defense contractors follow the military into an area and do whatever they want. And they get paid for it, and they're not accountable for the outcomes that they create. This is the monster that we, the people, are having to confront during this election year. And by re-electing the president, since he has absolutely committed himself to following through on draining the swamp, there is the hope that that process, despite the stonewalling and foot dragging of the Department of Justice and FBI's executive levels, that process can continue and succeed in doing what the president is trying to do. Another matter that the president is trying to clarify without becoming too directive or controlling or using neuro-linguistic programming and stuff like that is the difference between Russia and China that the mainstream media is absolutely unwilling to even address. Now, Russia got their butt kicked in both World War I and World War II. They lost millions of their population. And so what has happened since the wall came down is, with Mr. Putin's leadership, they have repented and turned back to the Christian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Church big time. They've put up 35 new cathedrals. Their cathedrals are burgeoning. The Orthodox people are being encouraged to have larger families, not smaller ones. I don't believe they allow just mass market abortion in Russia. Russia learned their lesson from World Wars I and II, and the breaking the back of the totalitarian Soviet state in 1989. They have embraced the Christian ethos. But notice how the deep state and the leftists and the neocons and the rhinos are still egging. They're still egging Russia, saying, it's the Russians, it's the Russians, it's the Russians, without acknowledging or recognizing that Russia has turned back to the accountability statutes of Scripture. And Russia acknowledges that this life on this world is not all there is, and we have to have good manners when we go out in space. Really? Okay. But then you look at China. And China was first embraced by Nixon with Kissinger's blessing back in the late 70s or early 80s. And we started helping China, giving them industry after industry after industry until our own country's manufacturing base was ransacked. But it went further than that, because the Chinese send us their cheap products that don't meet our standards, and we have no recourse for that. The Chinese have a lot of people. They believe they have too many people, and a war would serve them very, frankly, very well to get rid of their people. The one-child policy has created a society in China where most of the people are over the age of 50. They don't have young people. And the young people they have were single children who are little emperors and spoiled and don't want to do this and don't want to do that. Okay, they want to be techies and they want to play their games. All right, China has a huge problem, but a nuclear war would solve some of it. And so China to us is actually a risk and a danger, whereas Russia to us, Russia having re-embraced the Christian ethic of being peacemakers and following the golden rule, Russia is not the kind of enemy that China is. But you notice the mainstream media keep egging us on that the problem is Russia, the problem is Russia. All right, this is part of the mainstream media, the rich hoarders trying to influence our politics with their neuro-linguistic programming. And it's not working anymore because we've figured it out. We figured out that COVID-19 was a pandemic, and it was planned from the time Fort Detrick, Maryland began developing and manufacturing viruses in 1983 under the auspices of Dr. Tony Fauci and Dr. Redfield. And they hold patents, so many patents on vaccines that they profit from. CDC holds patents on vaccines that they profit from. So we, the people, are learning that developing a disease becomes a profit center. It is a protection racket that they make money on. So are you going to accept a mandatory vaccination from these people? Well, I sure hope not. I won't. I haven't had flu in 20 years, and I haven't had flu vaccine in 20 years, and I'm not going to start now. All right, so this is who we need to point out as the people who are causing the problems we have right now. The ones who say to us, there's no life but here, there are no ETs, there are no gods, so we can do whatever we want. Wrong. That's not correct. We do live in a populated universe and a populated galaxy. And if our leaders are so ignorant they don't know how to communicate, with the galaxy and the universe, then maybe they ought to engage some prophets, some telepaths, some psychics to get them in touch with what is going on in the rest of reality, in the rest of life. All right. So the ones we point to are the ones who insist, hi Rebecca, that there's nobody but us. They're the ones behind all of the reckless, renegade adventurism. And we can call them to task. And we have to call them to task. Whether it's writing to your legislator or writing to your mayor or writing to your governor or sending out tweets or talking to your neighbors or talking at church, we have to communicate together to get the people who keep telling us there's no life but us and we can do whatever we want without any consequences. All right. Look at the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in China now. Look at other areas that are being flooded or burnt. All right. Somebody has control over our weather who is not amenable to accountability statutes. We, the people, need to find out how that mechanism is working and how it was that this time it was HARP that brought lightning all the way down to the ground to start hundreds of fires. But last time we had pictures of the laser shots that started the fires. We know the fires are not spontaneous. They're not just happening. No. We know that we're having the wool pulled over our eyes every day. And we have to get past that. We have to get past the trust that we want to give to people we elected or people that were appointed. We have to get past trust and ask them to explain exactly what they're doing and what the consequences will be. We have to make civil leadership accountable. And we have to face the rich hoarders who own industries and who use their excess wealth to promote and propagate their own personal wish list for the rest of humanity. We have to confront Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and the owner of the Alphabet and the owner of the Washington Post and the New York Times and ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, PBS. They are all playing a game upon us, and we don't need it. They all want to tell us and teach us that there's nobody but us. There's no life but here. Just like NASA says, there's nobody but here, and there's no ETs, and there's no God. And that's where the deception starts. So because I'm still having trouble with my throat, I'm going to finish off with that idea. And I hope you will give me some feedback and tell me how you feel about this and tell me where are you going to go to make people understand that consequences have to be discussed and the reasons for policies have to be discussed, and the policies and the procedures and the practices can't become more important and more encompassing than the outcomes that are created by legislation itself. And I want to wish you all well. We're struggling in a difficult time right now, and the president has his hands full, and I hope you'll keep silencing the mainstream media. Turn off your TV. In fact, get it out of the house. We don't need to be programmed anymore. And this has been Maureen Emily Windsor Craig. Yes, being a foster kid, I have lots of names, lots of different points of view to have to deal with. And the one point of view that we haven't dealt with is the atheist point of view that says we're all there is and we're the best and we're righter than you. That's the point of view that's going to result in the total genocide of this civilization. So we'll see you next time we see you. And thank you so much for coming by. Bye-bye.